Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Nice for you to come out tonight, and there's a few showers about. For several years now, the Historical Society lectures have been, they're around 5 a year, sometimes 6, have been organised behind the scenes by Mary McCormack. And now, owing to a speaker pulling out, she's now stepping into the limelight. A native of Holland, and now happily married in Sandwick. Angus told me to put that bit in.
It's the happily married bit that's getting me.
Well, Mary was a school teacher, and like her husband, and latterly she was a tour guide, and hopefully she'll take us on a guided tour of what she's going to talk about. Of course, the couple have one daughter, and I think everybody knows she's a very talented singer, Edith McCormack. Tonight, Mary is looking into genealogical roots, and she'll tell us how she went about finding out who she really is. I'm not going to hold you back. My words are incomplete. But before I hand you over to Mary, Violet has been winking at me to say your subs are due. So everybody has to pay. Cough up now. Okay then, Mary.
Thank you, Malcolm. Good evening, welcome ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming here. Before I start my talk, I want you all to do one thing for, oops, I haven't got the things on, sorry. Before I start my talk, I want you all to do one thing for me. I want you to think of Alec. Now, it's not the Alec who originally was going to be talking tonight, it's another Alec. Now, there's nothing wrong with this second Alec, or there's nothing wrong with the first Alec either. But anyway, think about him. Keep the thoughts of Alec in your mind, because you might think I've been very emotional from time to time in the talk. Here we go. The title of the talk is Out of the Shadow of the Vikings, but it's got a secondary title, a subtitle, and it's called Shock and Awe. And here we go. In 2016, Falkland, the local book festival, took place in Lanther, her art centre, in early November. And on Saturday's early morning lecture, given by Madeline Bunting on her book For Love of Country, I contributed much to the amusement of the audience in the question and answer session. What was more of a comment rather than a question. The discussion at this point, having reached the question, and I'll put it in Gaelic, Coleshu. Coleshu, as most of us know, is the Gaelic for where do you come from, or more precisely, to whom do you belong? More commonly nowadays posed as who do you think you are? Now, with the large-scale movements of peoples, especially in Europe, in the last 200 years, making family ties more loose than ever, people nowadays seem keen to find out about their family trees, where their origins lie. In the UK and elsewhere, as we all know, there are TV programmes, and that's precisely what the title of the one that we see from time to time on the telly, Who Do You Think You Are? Where celebrities get to find out about their forebears with surprise. And he is played by the actor Danny Dyer, and he's a Cockney, and a man who was born within the sound of Bow Bells, a so-called commoner. He said this first, came from a slum. He discovered during one of the programmes that he was descended from not one but two branches of the royal house. William the Conqueror, King of England from 1066 to 1087, and Edward III, who was born in 1312, died in 1377, and was King of England from 1326 onwards. Possibly that makes Danny Dyer more royal than the present Queen. My Falkland 2016 comment went something like this. Recently, my husband and I received a phone call from our daughter who lives in Era to look out for a couple of packages in the post. We were to open them immediately and carry out the enclosed instructions straight away and repost them as soon as possible. Time was of the essence. The results of our endeavours would take 6 weeks to process, and were to be included in our Christmas presents. And Christmas was fast approaching. I was fairly excited but apprehensive when I realised that these proceedings would reveal our DNA. Everything was based on a spit, a tiny spit. I concluded this part of my story by emphasising, somewhat like a petulant child, that I wanted to be a Viking. Now remember, I'm talking in the Lantern at the book festival. I even went as far as adding that for me, Christmas Day 2016 would be a success or otherwise, depending on my DNA results. Someone asked why being a Viking was so important to me, and childlike, I could only repeat, because I want to be a Viking. To the amusement of the audience, one member suggested that a book be opened to take bets on the odds that I was a Viking. Perhaps odds were even offered, I couldn't tell because of the laughter. Now, I'm not the only one that feels that way. I have a book here that I read, very interesting book, a bit academic, but nonetheless interesting. Blood of the Isles, Brian Sykes. It's not just the Western Isles. The Isles means the whole of the UK and Ireland. Some of you might have already read it. And this is a quotation from it. I introduce it by saying, laughter aside, I'm not the only one who feels that way. In the Western Isles and along the West Coast, there was still, this is when he was collecting the blood from various blood donors. He used the blood donor sessions so that he could get a crowd of people. It would be easy to get a crowd of people, but he obviously didn't just use the blood samples that were taken for the blood donations. He actually obviously had to go and get the permission of each and every one for the blood he needed. In those days it was done through blood, not through the spit that Angus and I did. So in the Western Isles and along the West Coast, there was still a certain arcane, if you don't mind, arcane thrill at the possibility of a Viking ancestry, but this was eclipsed by an affiliation with a Celtic past, and then he adds, whatever that actually means. There you go. So that's the way I was feeling. I couldn't explain it anymore except by saying, I want to be a Viking. I tried to convey to the Thaclan audience the uncertainty of the possible outcome by recounting the tale our daughter told us on her return from her 2016 American tour, Easter tour with the Irish group, the Chieftains. In Pennsylvania, she had met an American man of middle years who for years, believing himself to be of Scottish origin, had worn the kilt. Then for confirmation, he had had his DNA tested, only to discover that his strongest roots were Germanic. He still wears the kilt because he has no wish to wear the lederhosen. During the break between lectures, several people approached me with smiles and words of encouragement. You'll be a Viking, all right, Mary. You're a MacLeod. Those of you who don't know me, MacLeod's my real name. McCormack's just the valley. With your colouring, Mary, you're bound to be a Viking, and so on and so on. I took heart from such comments. Of course I was Viking stock. I was indeed a MacLeod. No other clan had stronger claims to Viking blood than the mighty MacLeods. It is said that the MacLeods glorified in their Viking ancestry, but my brain still reminded me that only time, or to be precise, only the DNA would tell. People even said they'd be thinking of me on Christmas morning, and later in the new year, many people wanted to know my DNA results. Before I launch into my personal story, let me take a little time out to refresh our minds on how the story of the Vikings and their sojourn in the Western Isles, the Isle of Man, and other parts of Scotland and Ireland was presented to us over the centuries by historians, and how in recent times, because of research, we are encouraged to look more kindly on these Northmen and their deeds. Historians inform us that the men from the north, especially Norway and Denmark, the Lochlanich, the Vik or creek dwellers, or to some people the pirates from the far north lands, began raiding the coastal areas of Scotland and Ireland in the summer months. Sometime in the late 8th or early 9th century, and that initially they returned to their homes once the summer season was over. It is claimed that these raiders did not settle in Scotland and elsewhere until the middle of the 9th century at the earliest. Let's remind ourselves how the native population of Scotland and Ireland's coastal areas regarded these Lochlanich. When I visited Éire in the summer of 2017, my family and I spent a day in Waterford in the southeast. Waterford was founded by the Northmen in 914. While there we toured Reginald's Tower, originally a wooden round tower built by a Norse leader of that name, built at that time when Waterford was founded, 914. Obviously the first tower no longer exists, but the present round stone tower built on the same site dates from the 12th century. Here follow two descriptions from the tower which will remind us how most of us viewed the Vikings from the lessons taught in school. The first is attributed to a 9th century Norwegian mother and leaves us in no doubt how terrifying a Viking raid could be, and she's obviously talking to her son. Get thee a ship and go on the sea and kill men. And my own comment is she might have added, and women and children too. The second describes the thought of an Irish monk, a normally terrified in the summer season Irish monk, although he wasn't terrified on this particular night. And the reason is as follows. The wind is fierce tonight, it tosses the sea's white hair. I fear no wild Vikings sailing the quiet main. So you were all right if there was stormy weather. And from the Visitor Guidebook on Ireland's Ancient East, these words underline the most recent thinking on the Vikings. Now the first one is the usual. A terrifying new power came racing across the seas from the north, but it follows. At times they were raiders, then traders, then settlers, and they might have added to farmers because they introduced a lot of farming that probably the techniques are still used today. Donald MacDonald in his book Lewis, A History of the Island, writes that after the Western Isles were ceded to Scotland, the islanders who decided to return, I don't know why he doesn't have the word islanders in inverted commas, because in actual fact he's referring to the Northmen, the Vikings. The islanders who decided to return to their former homeland were no doubt those who had been in the habit of keeping slaves or scalags, who worked for their masters from dawn till dusk, when they were then allowed the privilege of working on their own small plots. And my comment is, I suppose these taskmasters were afraid of retribution from the real islanders. Now the question must be, why on earth would I or anyone else wish to be descended from such fierce, cruel, bloodthirsty beings? I can only answer this. It was not my wish as such, it was my birthright as a MacLeod, as an islander whose roots penetrated way down into the peat bogs, even into the very earth's crust. I was told this as a kid. I believed. I did not question my teachers, be they my parents, relatives, or whoever. On the perceived evidence, why should I? For support, I turned back to Donald MacDonald, and this is what he quotes. This is what he says, at least in one part of his book. Many Lewis people have the fair hair and blue eyes of their Norse ancestors, while their sailorly qualities and roving instincts have carried them to every corner of the world. And now to my tale. My birth surname, the paternal name is MacLeod. As I've told you, McCormack is my married name. We'll ignore the McCormack for the time being. I do that quite a lot, actually. My baptismal names are Mary Ann Miller. Ann with an E, Miller with an A. That's a Scottish spelling. These three names were those of my paternal grandmother, whose origins are to be found in Skye. Skye, of course, is another place of Viking settlement. So far, so good. It looked as though the possibility of being Viking through both the patrilineal and matrilineal lines of my father's side of the family was strong. And what of my mother's side? Her maiden surname was Mackay, with Macpherson being her mother, my grandmother's surname. The Clan Mackay lands are to be found in Caithness. Caithness, of course, is part of the north of Scotland, another area overrun by the Vikings. And I'm thinking to myself, boy, oh boy, things are still looking good. But now came this sneaky weed out. The Clan Mcpherson. The Clan Mcpherson resided not on an island nor a coastal area, but inland. Their land's been south of Inverness, near what today is a small town of Kingussie. Historians tell us that the Viking pirates initially stuck to raiding the islands of the land we now call Scotland, or our coastal areas, and even later, when the Vikings settled, they did not penetrate far into the interior. Would my luck hold, or could the Macpherson gene be the predominant one after all? So let's recap. On one side, I'm a mixture of MacLeod and Miller. On the other, Mackay and Macpherson. The first three tribal names come from areas where it is known the Vikings settled. Being inland-based, the Macpherson is dodgy. But hey, it's 3 against 1, and normally the strongest side wins. And all I can say at this point is, hope springs eternal. As an aside, I suspect most people feel akin to their surname, being the one they probably identify with, when in reality all 4 surnames, 2 each from both parents, must necessarily have equal claims. But we're not just a brochan of 4 names. There are many, many more in our composition. Think of it. If we're Christians, we believe we all began with Adam and Eve. That's a long way back. And if we're inclined towards the secular, we believe we go even further back. In my own case, the mix also included several other well-known Lewis or Scottish surnames. In the MacLeod-Miller mixture are Chisholm, McKeever, MacArthur, MacDonald, Macaulay, Morrison, Nicholson, Mackay. The Macaulay-Morrison ingredients are quite amusing as far as I'm concerned, but of course most people know that these 2 clans were always enemies at one another's throats. The former, the Macaulays, supported the MacLeods, and the latter one, the Morrison, supported the MacDonalds, and the MacLeods and the MacDonalds couldn't stand one another. While the Mackay-Macpherson recipe includes McKeever, MacDonald again, and McGillivray. Now, we pronounce that McGillivray, but the way it's spelt, it's McGillivray. In the context of my story, allow me to be irrelevant for a moment or two. This latter surname, McGillivray, or McGillivray, is intriguing to me because that name can be spelt in several different ways. But in this case, the case I'm going to tell you about, the spelling is identical. And believe it or not, McGillivray features strongly in Angus's family tree. We're told that the McGillivrays came from Mull, and Angus's maternal grandmother was born and brought up in Bunessan Mull, and her maiden surname was McGillivray. Perhaps he and I are blood related. That would explain a few things, but never mind. Let us return to my 4 main surnames, MacLeod, Miller, Mackay, Macpherson. What do we know about the MacLeods and Mackays which could lay a strong foundation for my Viking ancestry claims? Now, would you guess, both of these clans normally have the adjective warlike prefix in their names, as in the warlike MacLeods and the warlike Mackays. While the MacLeods often have the word warring as a lead-in to, and rightly so, for not only did they fight with other clans, but in the 16th century they spent much of their lives feuding among themselves. It's no wonder then that in the early 17th century the main clan lines of the MacLeods and Lewis became extinct. So far so good. The members of the Clan MacLeod are displaying that essential Viking trait, warlikeness. But where did the MacLeods come from? Tradition has it that the MacLeods are descended from Ljóth, defined as Ugly Wolf, son of Ulf the Black, king of Man and the Isles, who lived in the 13th century. Although in academic circles, there is no total agreement. Is there ever total agreement in academic circles of the relationship between Thorkel, Tormod and Ljóth? Most historians state that Thorkel and Tormod were the sons of Ljóth. Some other historians say that they were an uncle and a nephew. However, most of them say that they were the sons of Ljóth and that they were the founders of the two main branches of the clan, the Shiel Horkel and the Shiel Horomot, the seed of Thorkel and the seed of Tormod. From Thorkel came the MacLeods of Lewis, Waternish and Assynt, my clan, while from Tormod came the MacLeods of Harris, Dunvegan and Glenelg. And that's the way it should be said. It's not the MacLeods of Harris first, it's not the MacLeods of Dunvegan first, it's the MacLeods of Harris first, because that was their original seat. The MacLeods of Harris, Dunvegan and Glenelg, my kinsmen. This latter clan is still in existence. Its seat is now in Dunvegan and Skye, having been moved from Rodel and Harris in the 17th century. Whereas the Stornoway Castle, once a MacLeod of Lewis stronghold, was blown up by the withdrawing troops of Oliver Cromwell, the Lord Protector, in the 1650s. We leave the branch of the MacLeods of Shiel Horomot, usually known as the MacLeod of MacLeod. I love the tartan, hate that horrible orangey yellow thing for the MacLeods of Lewis. If I'm wearing a tartan, I wear the MacLeod of MacLeod. Don't tell anyone that. We'll leave the branch of the MacLeods of Shiel Horomot, usually known as the MacLeod of MacLeod, in peace, and for the moment hold in our thoughts that the internecine clan, the Shiel Horkel, claim Viking descent, albeit from an ugly wolf. On to the Mackays. The powerful Clan Mackay claimed descent from the royal house of Macheath. The Mackay lands are in the north of Scotland and Sutherland, but mostly in Caithness, areas where we're told the Vikings raided then settled. Places where today most locals proudly claim Viking descent, as evidenced by the Guardian reader, who not so long ago, when offering fellow Guardian readers her mother's recipe for ice cream pie, felt it necessary to include in her article that very fact, that most people from Caithness are descended from the Vikings. She proclaimed it so authoritatively too. There are also the Mackays of Argyll, but history informs us that they have no connection with the Mackays of the north of Scotland, and my Mackay ancestor came to Lewis from the north as a shepherd. Therefore, it's probably reasonable to assume that coming from this region of Scotland, he and the rest of the northern Mackays have Viking blood, or had Viking blood flowing through their veins. But what has reason got to do with it? Now, what are the Millers? The surname Miller is a work-related name. Millers were the grinders of corn, an important occupation wherever you lived. My Miller, or in my case, Millar, the Scottish spelling, came from Viking Skye in the form of my great-great-grandfather Roderick Miller, a lighthouse keeper. So somewhere along the line, the Miller must have decided that a change of job was in order. Sounds very 21st century, doesn't it? But importantly for my Vikingness, is there any evidence of their blood being Viking? As an aside, the Millers are a sept of the Clan Mcpherson. Let's remind ourselves of what a sept is. Simply put, a sept of a clan means a group of people who are not necessarily related by blood, but who link up with a bigger, a stronger clan for security's sake. So the Millers joined the Macfarlanes of Loch Lomond. And would you believe it, the Macfarlanes too are graced with the adjective warlike. At this point, I remind you that my Millers came from the Isle of Skye, Viking territory. And lastly, we come to the Mcphersons, or as previously stated in my search for Viking blood, the dodgy Mcphersons. McPherson, the son of the parson, a name of ecclesiastical origin. They too were fairly aggressive. For 200 years, the Mcphersons disputed with the Macintoshes for the leadership of that great and very ancient confederation, the Clan Chattan, the clan of the cats. Originally, this grouping was composed of Macintoshes, Davidsons, Mcphersons, McGilverys and McBeans, but later included other clans such as the Farquharsons. I've already told you that the Mcpherson lands are to be found south of Inverness. The Clan Mcpherson Museum is near Newton Moor. The Mcphersons claim descent from Murach, Parson of Kingusie in 1173, through Gillichattan, Patrick, or more particularly Gillichatta, second son of Ewan Ban. So the million-dollar question is, for me anyway, can the Mcphersons claim Viking blood? I doubt it, but don't listen to me. Only the spit will reveal all. So on Christmas morning 2016, in my Christmas onesie, I've beached up in my daughter's home in beautiful County Wexford. When I suddenly realised I have symptoms of what I suspect, remember Alec, I suddenly realised I have symptoms of what I suspect is an oncoming panic attack. I assure you they're real. Before we begin to open our presents, I speak. I explained to Angus Ailith and Noel, Ailith's husband, that I really will feel upset if I'm not a Viking. I know it's illogical, but it's the way I feel. So please, can we open all our presents and leave the DNA results until last? Even then, I ask, can I be the last to have my DNA revealed? They agree to this. On reflection, I think there is nothing to be gained for such an attitude. Que sera, what will be. But at that moment, I assure you, genuine apprehension, and I emphasize, genuine apprehension was the way I felt. By now, some of you might be thinking, what an idiot. But I assure you, I'm not alone in feeling this way. For example, the writer Edward Docks, writing in a recent Saturday's Guardian, explained how he struggled with his sense of self on learning that his Indian grandmother was not a blood relative. Since, and I quote him, I loved being part Indian, but it turned out that I wasn't. And there are others who have felt the same way. And now we reach Alec. Not everyone is amused like Alec on discovering that instead of being half Polish and half Caribbean, he is a Viking. Do you know who I'm talking about? Alec on the telly. He's an actor. He is selling the ancestry site, ancestry.co.uk. He's black. His skin is dark. He's got black hair up in a man bun, and he's got a jet black beard. And he's smiling broadly because he is a Viking. So that's it, you see. So I'm very jealous of Alec, but they're good. So back to an Irish Christmas morning. Like millions of people worldwide, we begin to open our presents. I watch the piles of torn wrapping paper mount, and I'm aware of my own mounting tension. Ridiculous, but real enough. As we continue tearing festive paper, releasing ribbons and bows, I'm frantically adding up mentally all the reasons for my being a Viking. I'm a MacLeod. The MacLeods are from Viking stock. I'm also Mackay and a Miller, people who come from areas in Scotland where the Northmen and women settled for not a few years but many, over 400 years. The settlement began, so the historians tell us, in the middle of the 9th century and lasted until the middle of the 13th, when 3 years after the inconclusive Battle of Largs, in 1266 came the Treaty of Perth, which gave the Western Isles to the Scottish king. 400 years is a long time for intermarriage to take place between Viking and native tribes, surely. And then we come to my features. My features aren't exactly non-Viking. I have fair skin, a mixture of grey, blue and green eyes, usually called cat's eyes. And in my youth I had lots of red hair. When I was a pupil in Sandwich School, for want of a better description, my hair used to reach my rear end. And it was often in what you might describe as Viking plaits or pleats, as we say in the Western Isles. And what are my face shape? Even I realise that it's a typical island shape. Seen in any village in the Western Isles, daily seen on the streets of Stornoway, referred to in my youth as a Viking face, which today might even be described as Mongoloid. Broad forehead, high cheekbones. Well, I had high cheekbones when I was younger, and also I had a more defined jawline that I'm afraid it's sagging over the years. Defined jawbone. My relatives always said of me, and I have had two sisters. Unfortunately, my younger sister died, but when my two sisters were both alive, they always said of me, "You came out of Holland," hence Angus's twisting Markham's arm today to say I came from Holland. In actual fact, I come from North Street. I live in the same croft in which I was brought up, in a different house, but same croft. My relatives always said of me, but not of my two sisters, "Oh, you came out of Holland all right." Holland, as we pronounce it, or home, as others might say, about 2 miles east of Stornoway, is the place where my father was born and brought up. And the name Holland has its origins in Old Norse, as indeed do many other names of villages in the islands. I learned early on in the first year of my marriage, when we lived inland on the mainland of Scotland, that I was not happy living without the sea being close by, as proved to be the case when in year 2 we moved to live closer to the sea. "It's your Viking genes, you're missing the sight, sound and smell of the sea," remarked those who knew me best. Despite all the stormy weather, and we all know how bad it can be on the Minch, it's some of the experienced sea captains say that it's one of the worst stretches of water in bad weather in the world. I've never been seasick, no matter how green the sea is. I've never been seasick when all around me are falling about. And then again, people would say, "That's due to your Viking ancestry," I have been told on many an occasion. And although I was of slight build when I was younger, I was a reliable rower or oars person. "There's plenty of Viking blood in your veins, that's for sure," was the comment made more than once. And as the icing on the cake, that's tongue-in-cheek, I display signs of the Viking disease, which sounds worse than it is in reality. Technically, it's known, and I checked with Dr. Smith tonight, as Dupuytren's disease. It's a condition that it's of ancient origin. Nobody knows, about it. It's a form of fibrosis, right? And it's in my stage. It actually sounds worse than it is. In my stage, it's not. It hasn't moved very much, but I do believe that great uncle had a pretty bad case of Dupuytren's disease. And when I was a tour guide, I lost count of the number of visitors who would tell me and proudly show me their claim to Viking blood. I assumed that because we were visiting a Viking island, that this was the forefront of their minds, but in what is really the initial stage of something which may, sooner rather than later, give you pain and make it awkward to pick up objects. In actual fact, a lot of people have it, but they say that it's only when your fingers start going into your eyes when you wash your face that they go and seek help from the doc. After all, Dupuytren's disease is a form of fibrosis, a development of excessive fibrous tissue, and it usually happens, I think Dr. Smith would confirm this, on the ring finger or the small finger. You can have a look at your hands now and see if you have it. There's a V shape because the ligaments are pulled down, right? Now, why it's what's called the Viking disease, I don't know. They claim that because it was very common in Northern Europe and the Vikings spread throughout Europe, that it must have come with them. Don't know. Anyway, it's called Dupuytren's disease after a 19th century very famous French surgeon. I don't think he had anything to do with discovering it or anything like that, but he was so well known, they just called it after him. Once again, let us return to Christmas Day 2016. Finally, the last presents are revealed the time of reckoning has arrived. Noel went first, her son-in-law. Now his name is Eccles, which I think is very funny. Eccles, Elif still calls herself Elif McCormack. Maybe that's because she thinks the surname is funny too. Anyway, now his surname is Eccles. Once again, that's a name of ecclesiastical origin and comes from the Kilmarnock area of Scotland, towards the southwest, the Ayrshire region. But his family is firmly rooted in Northern Ireland and Ulster, which is still part of the UK. So it was no surprise that he was 69% Irish, with the other components being GB British plus, and this is very interesting, 1% Native American. Now, most Americans would give their eye teeth to even be 1% Native Americans. If the people on the West Coast want to have Viking blood, then the Americans want to have Native American blood. It's amazing how the whole situation has changed. Once they couldn't do enough to get rid of the Native Americans, now they want to have Native American blood. I thought it was quite intriguing that he was 1% Native American, and I thought it was because of his dark-haired mother, but he thinks it might be his father. Doesn't look anything like a Native American, and he hasn't had time yet to find out, but anyway, he's going to try. Angus followed. The McCormacks we already knew were of Irish origin, Angus's family having crossed the Irish Sea to Dundee in the 19th century. It's possible they were looking for a better life and were perhaps from the Irish linen-making areas, with skills which may have been easily converted to working in the jute mills of Dundee. The saying at one time, of course, was that Dundee was built on jute, jam and journalism. Angus is 66% Irish, 29% GB British, 6% Viking, 2% Finnish Russian and 1% Iberian. He hopes he's Portuguese rather than Spanish because he prefers Portugal to Spain. And I hope I don't offend anyone in the audience with that remark. My turn. Elif had assured me that she had not looked at any of the DNA results beforehand, so I knew that she'd be watching my reactions intently. I also knew that each test had cost £100, so I hoped she would not be upset by my conduct should the results not go the way I wished. I tried to compose myself. I closed my eyes tightly and took a deep breath, a very deep breath. I looked at the screen. I was stunned. I almost fell off my chair in shock. Talk about shock and awe. Not one of my results hit the 50% mark. I was a mongrel, a mixture, a brochan. As for being a Viking, that was a laugh. One thing for sure was that I was no full-blooded Viking, not even half-blooded. The dream had dissolved, gone down the plug hole. Try as I might, I couldn't cover up my utter surprise, nay, shock. The most I was Irish. Irish! Never in my life had I heard any of my many surnames being even a touch Irish. I knew that this was going to take some time really to sink in. Here are my DNA results. 49% Irish, 47% British, GB British, 1% Finnish North Russian, 1% Stan, as in Afghanistan, Pakistan, Turkestan, Uzbekistan. Choose any of the Stans, the crossroads of Europe, and I was there. And last, perhaps least, 6% Viking. I wondered which part of me was that. A hand, a foot, a finger. To add, as it were, insult to injury, the blood of Genghis Khan, or Genghis Khan, whatever way you care to pronounce his name, to the volume of 1% courses through my veins. Now, having studied history and knowing about the Mongol hordes and their deeds or misdeeds, that's not exotic. That's the stuff of nightmares. I and my family, and indeed my fellow islanders, had for generations bought into the Viking myth. The myth stopped here for me. I was deflated. My daughter, on seeing that the wind had been knocked out of my sails, my Viking sails, felt compelled to apologise for her unusual Christmas present. I recovered sufficiently to assure her that the results did not matter. The truth was the truth, and the truth would out. At the same time, my mind was trying to process the knowledge just presented to me. Later on, some time after we had finished the Christmas meal, my head still spinning, unfortunately, I spoke my thoughts aloud. Me. Elith, which ancestry site did you use for the DNA results? Elith, ancestry.co.uk. Me, are there other such sites? Noel reading my thoughts precisely and laughing loud enough to be heard in Scandinavia. Don't waste your money, Mary. No matter which site is used, the end result will be the same. Your DNA won't change. It's done. Accept it. And I'm still saying to myself silently, I can't. It's too soon. I'm not sure I thought I was. That sort of thing. And that ought to end my story, but it doesn't. Let me wind back 43 years to 1974. It's early on a Saturday morning. I'm a young school teacher right at the start of my career. I'm about to give blood. I'm in this situation because of a newspaper advert. No, it's not about blood donors as such. The request is for Lewis-born people whose parents, grandparents, and most importantly, great-grandparents were born and raised on the island. I fit the bill. I'm encouraged to participate, so that's why I find myself in the pupil-free Maths Geography building of the Nicholson Institute this spring Saturday morning when I ought to be having a lie-in because of events the night before. It's the session 73, 74, and we were celebrating the centenary year, certainly in 1973, of the founding of the Nicholson Institute, and the school is involved in a series of celebrated events. And last night we had a fashion show, and afterwards the models and the organisers retired to the rectory, the home of Edward Young and his wife, to celebrate a busy, successful event. Naturally, it was a late evening and a little drink was consumed. I confess this to the researcher, who laughs loudly before reassuring me that it will all be centrifuged off. I think there were researchers from Glasgow University. At this distant stage, I've forgotten the reasons for the research, if indeed I ever really knew. It had something to do with the blood of the clans, I think. Not that this matters much to my story. My blood is duly taken, and I assume naively that when all is done and dusted, I'll hear about the results. Nothing happens. Years pass. Decades pass. Then, out of the blue, 30 years later, from the Stornoway Parliament, that group of elderly gentlemen who meet 3 times a week in Fort Rhodes Lodge to discuss world affairs and put the world to rights, came via my husband and courtesy of their chair, DL. The double-fold centre pages of a recent edition of a Scottish newspaper. As I read the newspaper's article, I can only assume that these are the results of that long-ago research. I wonder now if in some way this research was the initial faltering steps in the long road which eventually led to the breakthrough into the discovery of DNA. I don't know. But intriguing as it is, as I've said for my story, that's not the point. Among the many interesting conclusions revealed, there was one which immediately caught my attention, and which in the light of my subsequent Christmas present has continued to tantalise me. It was this. Of all the Scottish clans, the MacLeods have an extra something, a difference in their blood, that no other people in the world have, except a particular grouping of Pakistanis who live in that part of India we now call Bangladesh. I'm sorry, I can't remember exactly what the extra something was, what this was called. I misled the newspaper article. I have tried contacting several Scottish newspapers to no avail. And I'm going to blame DL because he cannot remember which newspaper she was buying at that time. I'm going to call it, whatever it is, a genome. I don't know if that's right or not. The 1973-74 researchers came to the conclusion that this latter fact, the identical genome being found in the blood of the Pakistani group and the Clan MacLeod, is because during the time of the British Raj, the MacLeod men were not faithful to their wives, who of necessity were back home in Lewis. Be that as it may, but in the light of my DNA results, I'm not sure if that theory still holds water. I'll return to that point. When I was preparing for this talk, I read several history books, some old, some new, some only recently published, some out of print. One of the most important was titled Blood of the Isles, I've showed it to you before, written by Professor Brian Sykes of Oxford University, a leading world authority on DNA and human evolution, the world's first genetic archaeologist. The book explores the genetic roots of our tribal history and was published in 2006. For me, his most important conclusion is, in fact, the definitive conclusion that though we may believe ourselves to be Scot, Pict, Celt, or Celt, Norse, Gael, Briton, Roman, Anglo-Saxon, Jute, Norman, whatever, the people of the Isles, as in the whole of the UK and Ireland, are Celts. So if you're of Scottish origin, Irish or English origin, this applies to you too. To sum up, in a good old Scottish saying, perhaps even a Celtic saying, ha ha, we're a chuck Timpson's bairns. In other words, we all come from the same ancestor, be his or her skin black, white, or any other shade in between. Up until a few months ago, it was claimed by archaeologists that that ancestor was from the African continent. But now they say even older remains have been discovered in Europe. Wherein lies the truth? Perhaps time will tell. I now return to the blood relationship recently discovered between MacLeods and the group of Pakistanis, Bangladeshis I just mentioned. It is officially called the Genghis Khan effect. And since it is now believed that the Celts came from even further east than 'twas once thought, perhaps the MacLeod soldiers of the Raj were not as promiscuous as the 1973-74 research made out. Could this blood match mean something else? Could it be just a natural occurrence? Does it show that the Celts really did come from further east than was previously believed? Future research might shine more light upon the subject. To end my talk, a brief but important note. You will recall my relating that after my impassioned plea at Falkland in 2016 that I hoped I was of Viking blood, many people said to me that they'd be interested to know my DNA results. Well, at the start of 2017, I enrolled in an IT course. Didn't do me any good, but I enrolled in it anyway, where one person who had heard my Falkland comments asked about my results. Sitting beside us was a lady whom I did not know, but who could not but help overhear our conversation. At its conclusion, she made the best, the most astute comment of all, and I must share it with you. She said, "We," meaning everyone in the world, "ought to have their DNA done, and then there would be no talk of immigrants, of we're all immigrants. Here, here, I say, put that in your pipe and smoke it," I add for the benefit of world leaders who apparently think the opposite, including one who has MacLeod blood running through his veins and whose mother has the same baptismal names as I proclaim loudly, no blood relationship. I earnestly wish that he and other such politicians would have a humane rethink about the topic of immigration. On my parents' headstone, the following lines appear. The following lines from one of the great 19th century poets, Alfred Lord Tennyson, are inscribed. I looked into the future far as human eye could see, saw a vision of the world and all the wonder that would be. And on mine, I hope, will be a continuation of these lines, and I make no apology for choosing these lines. Till the war drum throbs no longer and the battle flags are furled in the Parliament of Man, the Federation of the World. I'm happily out of the shadow of the Vikings, courtesy of my Christmas present, although I must admit I'm still sneakily wondering why, with my being Irish, 49%, it had been yet another place colonised by the Vikings, plus adding on my 47% GB Britishness, the Western Isles not being the only part of Britain to be subdued by the Vikings. Why am I not more Viking? Anyway, I want to put another quotation in here. If I can find it. Here it is. And again, I say that I'm not the only person to feel this way. There's a columnist in The Guardian called Patrick Collison who recently had his DNA explained, and he used not Ancestry.co.uk but a DIY site that you can use. Costs £130, and I'm sure the Ancestry.co.uk has gone up in price too since 2016. But he used this DIY DNA kit from Ancestry.com, and he wrote in The Guardian recently, discovering that when he did it, actually he discovered that he was only 9% British. Photograph of him, he looks British. But can I really just be only 9% British? My father's side, our English history and the census records quite agree that we are English, or British. So I don't know. He wasn't satisfied, and as you've heard, I wasn't either. Anyway, in the end, I'm even older than I thought I was. By golly, that's something. And you're all my kin. So, thank you all for your attention. My sisters, brothers, cousins, uncles and aunts, my extended family. The wheel has come full circle. I end my story.
I'll give Mary a little minute or two to have another drink and relax before she answers any questions. I just want to say to Mary that my mother was a MacLeod, and when I was wee, I had blonde hair. Hard to believe now, but and I used to sail around the harbour and go to the movies and see Kirk Douglas, Tony Curtis and the Vikings.
Have you had your DNA done?
Not yet,
well,
no.
If you're interested.
I always thought I was a Viking as well.
See? Yeah.
And that was emphasised to me when a lot of girls said to me I had a face like a nurse.
There you go.
Don't rub it in. So we got to have a laugh about it, but I'm sure people out there might want to ask a question or two of you, Mary. Anybody wish to? Or are you frightened to find out who you are? Mary, of course, you mentioned the MacLeods been out in the rash. They were out in the Khyber Pass and things like that in the 78th, and then the Seaforths and that. So
yeah.
There were a little bit of that going on, rather than people going around with suitcases on bikes. So I think that's where the stands came from.
Probably.
The other thing I would like to relate is that in 1050, at the Battle of Clontarf,
yes,
the Brian Boru of the Irish was fighting against the Vikings.
That's correct.
And on the Viking side were the Lord of the Isles and the MacLeods, etc.
That's correct. Yeah.
And now McCormacks have invaded Ireland and
yeah.
had a little settlement there. So.
In actual fact, the Irish are the only people that can spell the McCormack name properly. When I was a teacher, I was amazed at the different spellings McCormack came in. And one of them actually had a Z in it one day. If there's no questions, I'm going to tell you two more facts, nothing to do with my story whatsoever. So before we disperse, here are two other facts from Brian Sykes' research which I'd like to share with you. The first, and it's quite appropriate, since this is a time of Apelia, it's in the next day or two, or even tonight, I can't remember. And that is that the majority of Shetland and Orkney males are not of Viking descent. Now, I wouldn't dare I hope there's nobody from Orkney or Shetland here, because I wouldn't dare say that to anybody. But that's true. He says, Brian Sykes says that only 42% Shetlanders and 37% Orcadians are actually of Viking descent. And the other thing is, and this is closer to home, according to Brian Sykes, now he was, I don't know, maybe some of you are blood donors, maybe some of you were involved in this research, I don't know. But since I had cancer many years ago, they wouldn't accept my blood. And furthermore, there was some hitch with a blood transfusion I got, and I have antibodies to blood, so that just rules me out completely. But the second thing that so was anybody involved in the research, do they know? I think it was in the 1990s and onwards. He went right there
must be something going on at the moment, because in the doctor's surgery they have a notice, are you a MacLeod? Was your mother a MacLeod?
Your mother, not your father. Your mother is your mother, yeah. Right.
Unfortunately, with me, it's my great-grandmother, so it's a wee bit
a wee bit her. And my mother was not a MacLeod.
But it said, are you a MacLeod?
So, does that fit anybody here? Are you a MacLeod? Or
your father was a MacLeod?
Aye, my dad was a MacLeod, but not my mother, like the poster is asking. The second thing is, according to Professor Sykes, he found a tiny number of unusual clans, in the southern part of England. Two of these unusual clans are from sub-Saharan Africa, and 3 from Syria or Jordan. And he goes on to say, these exotic sequences are found only in England, with one exception. And guess where that one exception lives? In Stornoway. Sykes continues, this is an African sequence from Stornoway in the Western Isles, for which I have absolutely no explanation. The only explanation that he can give, or the only sort of reasonable explanation he can give, is that he thinks it's possible that this person, or maybe a family, is descended from Roman slaves. Now, it's not the Italians that came across in the 20th century to the UK to set up their fish shops and their ice cream parlours. I thought that was a wee interesting thing for you. Now, he doesn't obviously say who the person is, so I can't tell you if the person is sitting in the room or not. I don't suppose he even told the person.
Well, I know you could get Roman sandals in Kenneth Street about 10 years ago.
Actually, Angus told me to say, when I was talking about Dupuytren's disease, you know the actor Bill Nighy, one of my favourite actors, you'll notice that he's got it. His hand is very deformed. He says DL has it as well, but it's not because of Dupuytren's disease, it's the way that he hangs on to his cash. Angus told me to say that. I wasn't going to say it. There you go.
That's why we put him up there.
Okay.
Question. Maybe you could ask Marianne. She quotes extensively from the Guardian.
Sorry, who did you say? She? Who's the she? I didn't hear.
She quotes extensively from the Guardian.
Oh, I
didn't hear anything about the Telegraph or the Daily Mail. Did you read any of it?
No. Only when I can't get the Guardian.
If there's nothing else, could I just mention the fact that our office has been closed for the last 2 months with workmen in it. They're now away, but we still have one leak, and it's in the toilet, believe it or not. But we hope to be open within the next 2 or 3 months, and hopefully we'll see you there. The next speaker will be on the Tuesday, the 27th of February in this chamber, and it will be Katherine Maclean. Our subject will be Colonel Cullen Mackenzie, the first Surveyor General of all India, who was, of course, from Point Street, like where all proper boys live. But his house later on was on South Beach and Point Street, Carn House, but Carn Gardens is today. So I hope you all have a safe journey home, and I hope to see you again next month.
Thank you.